The unthinkable was about to happen. Elara Vance, radiant even in her distress, her 5-month pregnancy a gentle curve beneath her silk robe, held the cold, sharp-edged weight of divorce papers. Her gilded life with billionaire Julian Thorne, a life envied by many in the glittering social circles of Ethelberg City, was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. And all in the next 60 seconds, the time it would take for him to step out of their private elevator. What secret darker than the Ethelberg City midnight sky currently pressing against their penthouse windows was he hiding? Why had a single anonymous text message, a cruel digital stab in the back, become the key to unlocking a betrayal so profound it threatened to unravel not just her marriage, but her very sense of self? Don't you dare look away, because the revelation, the stark, ugly truth of it, is more venomous, more twisted than any whispered rumor you could possibly imagine. Elara stood frozen in the center of the cavernous living room, a space usually filled with the low hum of Julian's business calls, or the clinking of champagne flutes during their infrequent, always impeccably staged parties. Tonight, it was a mausoleum of silence, broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart and the distant, mocking wail of a city siren. The divorce papers lay on the antique mahogany table, a stark white accusation against the dark, polished wood. Her hand, when she'd placed them there minutes ago, had trembled so violently she'd almost dropped them. Now she balled her fists, her nails digging into her palms, a small, sharp pain to anchor her in the swirling vortex of her emotions. Dread, cold and suffocating, warred with a nascent, unfamiliar rage, a hardening resolve. She glanced at her phone, lying screen up on the marble mantelpiece. Chloe Davies' text message, received less than an hour ago, still burned on the display, each word a fresh twist of the knife. Julian, the gilded lily. Woman in a red dress. It's not a business meeting, Elara. So sorry. Call me so. Chloe, bless her pragmatic, unsentimental heart, wouldn't have sent it unless she was absolutely certain. The Gilded Lily, one of Ethelberg's most decadent, most discreet late-night establishments, a place where fortunes were flaunted and indiscretions carefully cultivated. And a woman in a red dress. The image, so cliché yet so devastatingly effective, seared itself into Elara's mind. It wasn't the first suspicion, of course. Oh no. The ground for this particular earthquake had been trembling for months, perhaps even years, if she were truly honest with herself. The late nights, always attributed to critical deals or investor dinners that ran over. The faint, unfamiliar scent of expensive perfume clinging to his bespoke suits, exotic bloom, a heady, almost vulgar fragrance so unlike her own subtle white gardenia. He dismissed her tentative queries with a patronizing smile, a casual, "Darling, you know how these things are, networking, schmoozing, it's all part of the game." It made her feel foolish, suspicious, even ungrateful. And the lies. The small, almost insignificant lies at first, then the bigger, more elaborate ones, each chipping away at the foundation of trust she had so naively believed was unshakable. He was a master of the art, Julian Thorne. He could weave a narrative so convincing, so utterly plausible, that she'd found herself doubting her own instincts, her own sanity. Was she just being a jealous wife? Was this the price of marrying a man of his ambition, his stature? He was, after all, Julian Thorne, the self-made billionaire, the darling of Ethelberg's financial elite. And she? She was just Elara Vance, the quiet artist from Willow Creek, plucked from obscurity and placed on a gilded pedestal. Perhaps she was asking for too much. But the text from Chloe, that was different. That was concrete. That was undeniable. It was the final, brutal confirmation of a truth she had desperately tried to avoid. The fairy tale was a sham. Her prince was a charlatan. Her fingers strayed to the small, ornate silver locket nestled at her throat, a gift from Julian in the early, sun-drenched days of their romance. It was intricately carved, but strangely it didn't open. "A symbol of our unbreakable bond, my love," he'd whispered when he'd fastened it around her neck. Some secrets are best kept close to the heart. What a cruel irony that felt now. The locket suddenly felt heavy, cold against her skin, a beautiful, deceptive cage for secrets she no longer wished to share. What if the biggest secret of all was the one Julian had been keeping from her all along? What if their entire life together was the lie? The soft chime of the private elevator, the sound she'd been both dreading and anticipating, cut through the oppressive silence like a guillotine. Her breath hitched, A small, involuntary gasp. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The end of everything she had known. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the terrifying, painful beginning of something new. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, a protective gesture. For you, she thought, a silent vow to the tiny life within. For us. The polished steel doors began to part. The facade crumbles, whispers and warning signs. Julian Thorne stepped out, a mask of practiced nonchalance barely concealing the night's transgressions, but Elara saw it instantly. The faint, damning smear of crimson lipstick on the collar of his usually immaculate white shirt, just peeking from beneath his loosened tie, before he even spoke. It was a shade too bright, too brazen, a color Elara herself never wore, a flagrant banner of his betrayal. He ran a hand through his dark, perfectly tousled hair, a gesture she once found captivatingly boyish, now a telltale sign of calculated disarray, an attempt to appear endearingly rumpled after a long night at the office. "Still up, darling?" he attempted, his voice a low purr, the one he used when he wanted to charm, to disarm, to get his way. Tonight, it merely scraped against her raw nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. He commented on the lateness of the hour, almost 3 a.m., muttering something about a deal that had run unexpectedly, excruciatingly long, the usual, threadbare excuse. He didn't look directly at her, not at first. His gaze, normally so direct, so piercing, swept over the vast, artfully lit living room as if searching for an invisible audience, or perhaps a quick escape route. These Japanese investors, you know how they are, meticulous to a fault. We were dotting I's and crossing T's until my eyes were practically bleeding. A small, tired chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. Elara remained silent, a statue carved from ice and fury, her eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on him. She catalogued every damning detail, each one a fresh twist of the knife in her already bleeding heart. His expensive tailored suit, charcoal gray, the one she'd helped him pick for the Thorne Industries gala last spring, assuring him it made his eyes look like the stormy Ethelberg sky, was undeniably rumpled in a way that spoke less of boardroom battles and more of other exertions. A subtle disarray that screamed of a night not spent hunched over contracts. And then there was the scent. Oh God, the scent. It hit her like a physical blow even from across the room. The cloying, sickly sweet fragrance of exotic bloom perfume, a cheap, ostentatious scent she'd noticed clinging to him with increasing alarming frequency these past few months, now more pronounced, more offensive than ever. It was an olfactory assault in her own home, a brazen territorial marking. It wasn't her perfume. It would never, ever be her perfume. Her own signature scent, a bespoke blend of white gardenia and sandalwood, was a subtle whisper compared to this screaming banshee of a fragrance. Her mind, a cruel tormentor, reeled back, a high-speed, unwelcome film reel of their life together. Back to Willow Creek, a sleepy, sun-dappled town upstate where life was measured in the changing seasons and the comforting rhythm of Sunday potlucks at the community hall, not in fluctuating stock prices and ruthless, hostile takeovers. She, Elara Vance, née Mitchell, had been a girl with what she thought were simple dreams then. Dreams of art, of capturing the fleeting beauty of the world on canvas, of making something lasting, something true. Dreams that felt a universe, an entire galaxy, away from this Ethelberg City penthouse, this opulent, suffocating gilded cage. But beneath that quiet artistic exterior had always been a spark, an unacknowledged yearning for more. More excitement, more passion, more life than Willow Creek, for all its gentle charms, could ever offer. A full scholarship to the city's most prestigious art college had been her escape hatch, her golden ticket into a world that glittered with an almost terrifying, intoxicating allure. And then she'd met Julian. It was at a university charity ball, a dizzying blur of too loud music, too bright lights, and the forced, brittle smiles of Ethelberg's elite. He wasn't the billionaire magnate then, not quite. He was an emerging entrepreneur, a shooting star in the financial firmament, hungry, ambitious, with a raw, almost feral fire in his eyes that mirrored her own unspoken desires. He was utterly magnetic, his laughter infectious, his intelligence a sharp, undeniable force that cut through the superficial chatter of the room. He'd singled her out from across the crowded ballroom. She, a fledgling artist in a borrowed dress, volunteering to hand out programs amongst the city's polished scions, and made her feel, for the first time in her life, truly seen. His confidence was a tangible thing, an invisible current that wrapped around her, pulling her inexorably into his orbit. He'd made her feel as if she were the most fascinating creature he'd ever encountered. How laughably naive she'd been. Their courtship had been a whirlwind, the stuff of breathless, envy-inducing fairy tales. Candlelit dinners in restaurants so exclusive they didn't even have names, perched atop skyscrapers, the glittering, indifferent sprawl of the Athelberg skyline their personal backdrop. Stolen weekends sailing near the sun-drenched turquoise shores of Isla Fantasia, a private island enclave whose very name whispered of magic, escape, and unimaginable wealth. And then, the proposal. On a sleek, billion-dollar private yacht anchored in a secluded cove under a canopy of stars that seemed to shine only for them, he'd gone down on one knee, a ridiculously large, impossibly perfect diamond winking in the soft moonlight, reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. He'd promised her the world, a lifetime of adventure, of passion, of unwavering devotion. And for a while, a blissful, intoxicating while, it felt like he'd delivered. Their wedding at the Grand Excelsior had been the event of the season, a lavish, almost obscenely opulent spectacle, meticulously chronicled in the glossy pages of society magazines. Elara, a radiant vision in custom-made Chantilly lace, Julian beaming beside her, the triumphant conqueror, his prize well and truly won. But even in paradise, as she now knew all too well, snakes find a way to slither in, their venomous whispers poisoning the sweetest fruit. The idyllic memories, so precious, so carefully hoarded in the vault of her heart, began to fray at the edges, interwoven with almost imperceptible threads of a creeping, insidious unease. Julian's late business meetings became more frequent, stretching into the small, lonely hours of the morning. "It's crucial, Elara, this merger," he'd murmur, his lips brushing her forehead, already halfway out the door, his briefcase a constant, unwelcome companion. "You understand, don't you, darling? This is for us, for our future." And she had. Or, more accurately, she'd pretended to. What choice did she truly have? His ambition, that relentless, all-consuming drive, was an intrinsic part of who he was, part of what had drawn her to him in the first place. How could she resent it now? His defensiveness, though, that was new. That was a discordant note in the symphony of their supposedly perfect life. When she gently, tentatively questioned the sheer number, the sheer lateness of these nocturnal endeavors, a distinct coolness would enter his voice, a subtle hardening of his eyes. "Are you timing me now, Elara? Keeping tabs?" he'd asked once, his tone laced with an uncharacteristic irritation. "I'm building an empire for us. A little trust, a little understanding of the pressures I'm under wouldn't go amiss." The implication, unspoken but crystal clear, was that her questions were an impediment, a sign of her naivety, of her inability to comprehend the rarefied, high-stakes world he inhabited. He made her feel small and foolish. Unexplained, often ostentatiously lavish, gifts would frequently appear after particularly long, unexplained absences, or after a night where the scent of exotic bloom was particularly strong. A stunning, impossibly heavy diamond bracelet she rarely wore, a rare first edition of her favorite poet, bound in sapphire blue leather. They felt less like spontaneous tokens of affection and more like deflections, appeasements, hush money for her dawning unwelcome silence. The bracelet, in particular, lay cold and heavy in its velvet box in the safe. Each time she even glimpsed it, it reminded her of a specific week he'd been out of town securing vital overseas funding, only for her to later, accidentally, see a blurry paparazzi shot of him at a star-studded Ethelberg charity gala he'd never mentioned attending. A glamorous, statuesque woman with fiery red hair, her face artfully obscured by a large hat, laughing uproariously at his side. He dismissed the photo as a meaningless encounter, darling, a business associate's needy wife. Then there was the Phoenix account. The name itself sounded ominous, dramatic, like something illicit, something rising from ashes it had no right to. She'd only overheard snippets once, late one night when Julian thought she was asleep in their vast, silent bedroom. He'd been on the phone in his soundproofed study, but the door hadn't been quite latched, and his voice, a low, angry growl she'd never heard him use before, had carried. "The Phoenix account is becoming a significant liability. This problem needs to be neutralized, silenced, permanently, if necessary. I don't care what it takes, just handle it." Who was he talking to? What problem needed to be silenced? The words had sent a visceral chill down her spine, a frisson of genuine, unadulterated fear. When she'd tentatively, nervously asked him about it the next morning, feigning a vague recollection of him mentioning a difficult new account called Phoenix, he dismissed it with an airy, condescending wave of his hand. Just complicated business jargon, darling. Internal codes. Nothing for you to worry your pretty little artistic head about. Patronizing, infuriating, and utterly unconvincing. She'd tried, oh, how she'd tried, to rationalize it all away. He was under immense, unimaginable pressure. This was how great fortunes were made, in the brutal, unforgiving coliseum of high finance. She was being overly sensitive, wasn't she? Perhaps the early pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid, just as he so often, so helpfully, suggested whenever her unease surfaced. Wasn't this opulent life, this glittering penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of Athelberg, its museum-quality walls adorned with priceless, emotionally barren art, the life she'd indirectly chosen when she'd fallen for the irresistible force that was Julian Thorne? Now it felt less like a home, less like a sanctuary, and more like an exquisitely furnished, perfectly maintained prison. A gilded cage where she was the prized, increasingly restless, and deeply unhappy songbird. Her fingers tightened around the small, ornate silver locket he'd given her in the early, intoxicating days of their courtship, a token from a weekend trip to a quaint antique market in the countryside. It was cool, almost icy, against her clammy palm. She'd always cherished it, its intricate carvings of twining vines and tiny, hidden stars, a testament to a love she'd believed was unique, eternal. Yet, a part of her had always been frustrated by it, intrigued by its steadfast refusal to yield its secrets. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it didn't open. She'd asked him once, lightly, playfully, what was inside or why it was sealed so. He just smiled, that enigmatic, captivating smile of his, the one that could melt glaciers, and said, "Some mysteries are best kept, my love. It symbolizes the secrets we'll always share, just between us, a bond that can't ever be broken." Now, his poetic words tasted like ash and deceit in her mouth. What secrets, Julian? What bonds? The only secret she felt now was the suffocating weight of his lies. The present, harsh and unforgiving, slammed back into focus with brutal clarity. Julian was still standing near the elevator, the picture of carefully constructed, slightly disheveled innocence, though a flicker of something unreadable. Annoyance? Apprehension? Guilt, perhaps? Was beginning to dawn in the depths of his usually unreadable blue eyes, as her silence stretched thick and palpably accusatory between them. He took a hesitant step towards the bespoke, mirror-backed liquor cabinet, its crystal decanters gleaming like captured stars, perhaps to pour himself a stiff drink, to further fortify his rapidly crumbling facade. And that's when his gaze finally, inevitably, dropped to the antique mahogany table between them, to the stark, official white of the legal-sized envelope resting there. Their names, Elara Vance versus Julian Alistair Thorne, linked by the chillingly formal, undeniably final verses. The divorce papers. His confident, world-conquering smirk, the one that had disarmed CEOs and charmed entire international boardrooms, didn't just falter. It shattered. It imploded. The blood drained from his face with astonishing speed, leaving his usually ruddy, arrogantly handsome complexion a sickly, waxy, almost translucent yellow under the penthouse's carefully calibrated, unforgiving ambient lighting. The hand that had been reaching for the heavy crystal decanter of his favorite single malt scotch froze midair, suspended. The silence in the room stretched, taut and fragile as a spider's web, seconds ticking by, like the slow, ponderous hammer blows of a funeral bell against Elara's heart. He looked from the damning envelope back to her, his eyes wide, uncomprehending, a dawning, unadulterated horror slowly replacing the carefully constructed nonchalance. Finally, he spoke, his voice no longer a seductive purr but a hoarse, strangled whisper, a sound so raw, so alien, it seemed to be ripped from the throat of a stranger, not the indomitable Julian Thorne she thought she knew. What in God's name is this, Elara? The confrontation and the great escape. His gaze, wide and stricken, fixed on the crisp white envelope lying like a judgment on the polished mahogany. What in God's name is this, Elara? Julian's voice, usually so resonant with command, so accustomed to instant obedience, was a hoarse, strangled whisper. the sound of a man teetering on the very edge of a precipice he hadn't even seen, let alone anticipated. He looked utterly poleaxed, as if the floor had just vanished beneath his expensive, handmade Italian leather shoes. "Divorced, Julian." Elara's voice, though quiet, almost unnaturally calm, sliced through his dawning horror with the deadly precision of a shard of obsidian glass. Each syllable was carefully, deliberately enunciated, a final, irrevocable decree. She watched, a strange, almost out-of-body detachment settling over her, as the remaining color continued to drain from his face, leaving behind a waxy, almost ghastly pallor that made his usually vibrant blue eyes look stark and unnervingly hollow. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Perhaps he had. The ghost of their marriage. His initial disbelief was almost comical, if the situation hadn't been so devastatingly tragic. It manifested as a brief, sputtering denial, a splutter of incredulity. "Divorce, Elara? Are you actually serious? Is this some kind of sick joke? Because if it isn't remotely funny." He even managed a shaky, utterly unconvincing laugh that died a quick, pathetic death in his throat. Then, as the stark, undeniable reality of the papers, of her glacial, unwavering expression, began to penetrate the thick fog of his shock and arrogance, that denial curdled rapidly into a defensive, blustering anger. "You can't be serious," he exploded, his voice suddenly regaining its familiar force, though now laced with a panicked edge she'd never heard before. "After everything we've built together? Everything I've given you? All of this?" He gestured vaguely, almost wildly, around the opulent, art-filled penthouse, his hand trembling slightly, a tremor he quickly tried to conceal. "You're throwing all of this away because I was a little late tonight? Is that what this is all about? Some petty fit of pique?" Elara felt a weary, bone-deep sigh escape her lips. She'd expected this. The bluster, the indignation, the immediate attempt to minimize his transgressions, to shift the blame onto her supposed irrationality. It was classic Julian. "It's not just about tonight, Julian, and you damn well know it." Her voice was still calm, eerily so. A stark, chilling contrast to the inferno of betrayal and grief raging within her. She began to list the evidence, her words falling like steady, relentless, corrosive raindrops onto his rapidly dissolving composure. "It's about the crimson lipstick on your collar, Julian. Scarlet Sinner, I believe the shade is called. Definitely not one of mine. A little too brazen for my taste." Her eyes were cold, her expression unyielding. "It's about the cloying, cheap scent of exotic bloom perfume that's been clinging to your clothes, to your skin for weeks now. A perfume you ludicrously tried to tell me was from a new, rather flamboyant, and unfortunately very touchy-feely female client from Brazil. Remember that particularly creative gem?" A ghost of a bitter, mirthless smile touched her lips. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. "It's about the endless late nights, the string of hushed, secretive phone calls you always take out on the terrace, even in the dead of winter, the way you flinch and angle your phone away if I happen to come too close when its screen is lit up with incoming messages." She paused, letting her words hang in the suddenly frigid air between them, then delivered another, more pointed blow. "And it's about this, Julian, this little piece of irrefutable truth." She held up her own phone, the screen displaying Chloe Davies' damning text message, the words glowing like a malevolent digital accusation in the dim, artfully arranged lighting of the penthouse. "Julian, the Gilded Lily. Woman in a red dress. It's not a business meeting, Elara. So sorry. I saw them with my own eyes. Call me when you can." Julian's eyes flickered to the screen, a brief, hunted glance, then darted away, like a cornered animal desperately seeking an escape route where none existed. "Chloe?" He scoffed, attempting a dismissive tone that failed miserably. "What the hell does Chloe Davies know about anything? She's always been jealous of us, Elara, you know that. She's probably just stirring up trouble. You can't possibly believe her over me, your own husband." This was it, the predictable pivot, the gaslighting, the insidious, manipulative attempts to twist reality, to erode her confidence, to make her the unreasonable, the hysterical one. She'd steeled herself for it, anticipated every word. "And you're pregnant, Elara," he exclaimed, his voice rising now, taking on a note of desperate, almost pathetic manipulation. He even took a step towards her, his hands outstretched in a mockery of supplication. "Your hormones are all over the place. You're not thinking clearly, darling. You're being paranoid, overly emotional. This isn't like you. No, Julian. She cut him off, her voice suddenly gaining a surprising resonant strength, a steel she hadn't known she possessed until this very moment, forged in the fires of his betrayal. Her hand instinctively, protectively went to her slightly rounded belly. My pregnancy has made everything clearer than it has ever been, crystal clear, in fact. She met his gaze directly, her own eyes, usually so soft, now glinting with an icy resolve. Our child, she emphasized the word, a deliberate, pointed barb, will not grow up in a house built on lies, Julian. Our child will not be surrounded by deceit and infidelity from the moment it draws its first breath. She took a deep, steadying breath, the air in the opulent room feeling thick, heavy, suffocating. Do you remember 2 months ago, Julian, the night of the Chilton Foundation Gala? You claimed you were at an all-night emergency investor meeting across town, that you flew straight there from a critical business trip to Chicago and didn't even have time to come home first. So vital, you said. The fate of Thorne Industries supposedly hung in the balance. He nodded slowly, warily, his eyes narrowed, clearly trying to anticipate where this was going. Yes, of course, I remember. It was a brutal negotiation. We almost lost the entire deal. I told you all about it. Funny, Elara said, her tone dangerously soft, almost a purr, but with claws hidden beneath. Because the next morning, while you were supposedly sleeping off your jet lag and the exhaustion of saving your empire, I found this in the breast pocket of the tuxedo you'd apparently worn to that brutal negotiation. She pulled a creased, faded receipt from the pocket of her silk robe, holding it up for him to see. A receipt from the Gilded Lily, time-stamped at precisely 2:37 a.m., for 2 vintage Dom Perignon champagne cocktails and an order of oysters Rockefeller for 2. An interesting choice of sustenance for a solitary, high-stakes, all-night business negotiation, wouldn't you say, Julian? Julian stared at the innocuous slip of paper as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, a goldfish gasping for air. No convincing answer came. He fumbled, stammered something utterly incoherent about a quick, impromptu, celebratory drink with a grateful junior colleague after the grueling meeting had concluded, a story so flimsy, so transparently false, it was almost insulting to her intelligence. The carefully constructed, impeccably polished facade of Julian Thorne, Ethelberg's golden boy, master of the universe, was crumbling before her very eyes, disintegrating into a pile of pathetic, sordid lies, revealing the weak, deceitful, and ultimately rather ordinary man beneath. It was, in a strange way, almost liberating to see. The argument, if one could even call his increasingly frantic, blustering denials and her quiet, ice-cold, factual rebuttals an argument, began to escalate. Julian's voice rose several octaves, his handsome face flushing a dangerous, apoplectic red. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. You're throwing away our marriage, Elara, our life, everything we have, over a misunderstanding, a couple of out-of-context assumptions. He slammed his fist down hard on the polished rosewood surface of a nearby console table, the sharp crack echoing unnaturally in the vast, silent space. The collection of antique Fabergé snuff boxes, his latest pretentious acquisition, rattled precariously. Elara flinched involuntarily but stood her ground, her chin held high. He wasn't physically threatening her, not yet, but the air crackled with his barely suppressed, impotent rage. He was losing control. And Julian Thorne never lost control. It was perhaps the one inviolable rule in his meticulously ordered universe. Elara felt a wave of profound exhaustion wash over her, so overwhelming it was a monumental struggle to remain upright, to keep her knees from buckling. But beneath the crushing exhaustion, a core of pure, unadulterated, diamond-hard resolve had solidified. She was done. Utterly, irrevocably, and completely done. I'm leaving, Julian, she stated, her voice surprisingly flat, almost devoid of the maelstrom of emotion that churned within her breast. He actually scoffed, a short, sharp, incredulous bark of laughter that held no humor, only a dawning disbelief. Leaving? He spread his arms wide, an almost theatrical gesture encompassing the obscene opulence of their penthouse apartment, the priceless art, the panoramic city views. And go where exactly, Elara? Back to your charming little mother in sleepy Willow Creek? What are you going to do there, darling? Paint pretty little pastoral landscapes for the local craft fair? Be realistic, for God's sake. You wouldn't last a week without this. Without me, his arrogant posture screamed. His words, each one carefully chosen, were designed to wound, to undermine, to remind her of her perceived dependence on him, on his world, on his money. But Elara was already moving, turning her back on him, on the life he represented. She walked towards the hall, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She scrolled to a number she knew by heart, a number that represented sanity, loyalty, and the unwavering, unconditional love of true friendship. Her best friend, her sister in all but blood. Serafina Sarah Dubois. The phone rang twice, each ring an eternity, before Sarah's warm, slightly husky, perpetually paint-splattered voice answered. Elara? You okay, babe? It's almost 4 in the morning. What's up? Sarah. Elara's voice cracked, the first real sign of the tsunami of tears that threatened to overwhelm her. I need you. Can I come over? Now? There was no hesitation, no barrage of surprise questions, no judgment, just pure, unadulterated, rock-solid friendship. Of course, sweetie. Oh God, Elara, what's happened? Don't answer that now. I'm on my way. My car, 5 minutes, tops. The spare room is yours, for as long as you need it. You know that. Always. Elara hung up, a tiny, fragile sliver of relief piercing through the suffocating despair that had enveloped her. She turned back to face Julian, who stood watching her, his expression a confusing, unreadable mixture of residual fury and a dawning, desperate, almost childlike fear in his eyes. She walked, not ran, into their cavernous, opulent bedroom, the one that overlooked the entire glittering, indifferent expanse of Ethelberg City, and pulled out a small, simple, somewhat battered leather overnight bag from the very back of her enormous walk-in closet, a relic from her pre-Julian life. A reminder of the independent woman she once had been. She methodically, almost robotically, packed only the absolute essentials. A change of comfortable clothes, her favorite worn cashmere sweater, basic toiletries, her prenatal vitamins, the battered, dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice that had been her constant comfort through countless previous, though infinitely smaller, heartaches. She deliberately, pointedly, left behind the endless rows of unworn designer dresses, the velvet-lined drawers overflowing with blood-reddened jewels, the tangible, glittering symbols of Julian Thorne's obscene wealth, and now, his profound, soul-destroying betrayal. They were merely the pretty, expensive bars of the gilded cage, and she, finally, was flying free. As she walked back towards the foyer, her small bag clutched in her hand like a lifeline, Julian moved to intercept her, his handsome face a mask of raw, unfiltered desperation. He reached out, his fingers surprisingly gentle, closing around her arm, pleading. Elara, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I know we can. There are things you don't understand. Complications. We can go to therapy. I'll do anything. Anything you ask. Just think about the baby. Our baby. His words, meant perhaps to be a lifeline, a bridge back to what they once had, were instead the final, decisive severing of the cord. Elara looked down at his hand on her arm, then slowly lifted her gaze to meet his, her own eyes, clear and unwavering, though tears now streamed freely, silently down her pale cheeks. She gently but firmly pulled her arm from his grasp. I am thinking about the baby, Julian, she said, her voice thick with unshed grief, but resonating with a newfound, unshakable conviction. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I'm also thinking about myself. With that, so she turned, her back straight, her head held high, and walked out of the private elevator lobby, out of the opulent, suffocating penthouse that had become her beautiful prison, leaving him standing there, stunned, silent, and utterly alone. A fallen king amidst the cold, glittering, meaningless symbols of his vast, empty empire. Downstairs, on the rain-slicked, early-morning Ethelberg Street, Sarah's slightly battered but beloved, utterly reliable old hatchback was waiting, its engine a comforting, familiar, welcoming rumble in the pre-dawn gloom. The uniformed doorman, a stoic man who had always greeted Elara with an almost reverential, tip-expectant deference, now looked on with an expression of carefully masked, open-mouthed surprise as she, Mrs. Julian Thorne, the chatelaine of the penthouse, emerged not into a waiting, gleaming black limousine, but towards this humble, paint-chipped vehicle. Sarah jumped out before Elara had even reached the curb, her usually cheerful face etched with a mixture of fierce warrior woman protectiveness and deep, empathetic concern. She enveloped Elara in a tight, strong hug that spoke volumes. "Oh, honey, you did it. You actually did it?" Elara just nodded, unable to speak past the enormous lump in her throat. A fresh wave of tears, raw, ragged, and wonderfully cleansing, finally breaking free as she slid gratefully into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly, wonderfully, of Sarah's signature lavender sachets, old books, and the lingering happy scent of oil paints. The scent of home, of safety, of unconditional acceptance. As Sarah pulled away from the curb with a reassuringly confident roar of the small engine, the towering, indifferent skyscraper that housed her former life, her former self, began to recede in the rearview mirror, its glittering, myriad lights blurring into watery, impressionistic streaks through Elara's tear-filled vision. She clutched the small, cool silver locket in her hand, its familiar weight a strange, unexpected anchor in the roiling, tumultuous sea of her emotions. Freedom. It tasted like salt and rain and the terrifying, utterly exhilarating unknown. She looked over at Sarah, whose free hand briefly, comfortingly, squeezed her knee in a gesture of silent, unshakable, priceless support. The Ethelberg city skyline, once a glittering symbol of her grand, improbable love story, now represented only the beautiful, empty, glittering prison she had just, miraculously, escaped. "What now?" Elara whispered again, the words barely audible above the steady thrum of the engine and the rhythmic, hypnotic drumming of rain against the windshield. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with uncertainty, with trepidation, but also, for the very first time in what felt like an absolute eternity, vibrantly, thrillingly, wonderfully alive with possibility. Legal battles and emotional fortitude. The Ethelberg city skyline, once a glittering tapestry of dreams realized, a daily vista from her penthouse prison, now seemed to mock Elara as Sarah's small, valiant car navigated the rain-slicked, awakening streets. Each towering, indifferent edifice of glass and steel felt like a monument to Julian's formidable power, a stark reminder of the world from which she was now a determined, if terrified, exile. The question, "What now?" she'd whispered to Sarah in the pre-dawn gloom, still hung heavy and unanswered in the air, tasting of fear, yes, but also of an almost giddy, terrifying, intoxicating freedom. The answer, it seemed, the first step on this unknown path, lay behind the imposing, polished oak doors of Ethelberg's most formidable and reassuringly expensive legal minds. She needed a warrior, and Miss Evelyn Hayes had come highly recommended as precisely that. The sleek, intimidating offices of Hayes & Associates, perched high in a glass and steel monolith in the heart of the financial district, felt like another planet entirely, a universe away from the comforting lavender and turpentine-scented creative chaos of Sarah's beloved paint-splattered apartment. But Elara, her worn leather overnight bag now containing a small, meticulously organized file of painstakingly gathered evidence. Copies of the damning text messages between Julian and his various associates, the incriminating Gilded Lily receipt, printouts of Julian's increasingly erratic and extravagant spending from their supposedly joint account before she'd hastily, and not a moment too soon, had her own modest funds transferred to a new, private one, clutched it to her chest like a precious, fragile shield. She was going into battle, and this file was her only ammunition. She was ready. Or at least she was desperately trying to convince herself, and the tremor in her hands, that she was. Sarah, ever the steadfast, unwavering guardian angel, gave her hand a final reassuring squeeze as they were ushered by a glacially polite assistant into a plush, art-filled waiting room that hummed with the quiet, almost unnerving hum of expensive, high-stakes efficiency. This was not a place for tears or indecision. Miss Evelyn Hayes was exactly as her formidable reputation and Sarah's glowing endorsement had suggested, sharp as a newly honed scalpel, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy power suit that probably cost more than Elara's first car, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back from a high forehead in a severe but undeniably elegant chignon. She was a woman in her late 40s, Elara guessed, with eyes that missed nothing, that seemed to see right through to the trembling core of one's being. Yet, surprisingly, held a current of genuine, unexpected warmth, an undercurrent of hard-won empathy that immediately put Elara, if not entirely at ease, then at least on a slightly more solid footing. "Mrs. Thorne? Elara?" Miss Hayes corrected herself with a small, almost imperceptible professional smile as Elara and Sarah were shown into her expansive corner office, The entire Ethelberg cityscape spread out behind her enormous glass-topped desk like a conquered submissive territory. "Please sit, and this is..." Her gaze flickered briefly, appraisingly, towards Sarah. "My best friend, Serafina Dubois," Elara managed, her voice a little shaky despite her best efforts at composure. "Sarah, this is Miss Hayes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Dubois. Your loyalty does you credit," Miss Hayes said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Then, turning back to Elara, her expression all business once more. "Elara, I appreciate you coming in so promptly. I've read the preliminary notes you sent over. Now please, tell me everything, from the very beginning, and don't leave anything out, no matter how insignificant or painful it may seem." And so, Elara did, with Sarah occasionally interjecting a supportive, corroborating comment or a gently clarifying detail when Elara's voice threatened to break. She recounted the entire sordid, heartbreaking saga. She spoke of Julian's irresistible charm, his boundless ambition, the slow, insidious creep of his deceptions, the casual cruelty of his gaslighting, and the final, brazen, soul-crushing infidelity. She laid out the evidence, her hands trembling only slightly as she passed the damning, gilded lily receipt across the vast, intimidating expanse of polished mahogany. Miss Hayes listened intently, her intelligent gaze unwavering, occasionally making a precise, almost surgical note on a thick legal pad with a slender, elegant gold pen. There was no judgment in her eyes, no surprise, only a focused, professional intensity that was, in its own way, incredibly reassuring. She'd clearly seen it all before. Many times, when Elara had finally finished, her throat raw, her eyes burning with unshed tears, Miss Hayes nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Thank you for your candor, Elara. That couldn't have been easy. Based on what you've told me and the compelling evidence you've provided, we have exceptionally strong grounds for filing for divorce based on adultery, and potentially, depending on further investigation into Mr. Thorne's financial dealings, other contributing factors. We will, of course, petition for substantial alimony. Julian Thorne's considerable net worth is a matter of public record, and you are legally entitled to maintain a lifestyle commensurate with that which you enjoyed during the marriage. More importantly, much more importantly, we will secure comprehensive, ironclad child support, including educational trusts and provisions for future well-being, to ensure your baby's future is unequivocally protected. And given your pregnancy, the undeniable emotional distress caused by Mr. Thorne's egregious actions and his increasingly erratic behavior, we can certainly, and I believe successfully, petition for exclusive occupancy of the penthouse, at least temporarily, until more permanent arrangements can be made." Miss Hayes's tone was calm, professional, and incredibly, wonderfully, reassuringly competent. For the first time in weeks, Elara felt a tiny flicker of hope. Then came the inevitable warning, delivered with that same calm, unflinching precision. "However, Elara, you must be thoroughly prepared. Men like Julian Thorne, men with his kind of staggering wealth, his vast influence, his army of connections, they don't just roll over and accept defeat, especially not a defeat played out in the public eye. He will fight this. He will likely fight it tooth and nail, with every resource at his considerable disposal. He will undoubtedly have his own team of high-powered, very expensive legal sharks, and they will almost certainly try to discredit you, to minimize his culpability, to portray you as unstable, greedy, or worse. They will try to protect his assets, his reputation, his public image, above all else. This will be a battle, Elara. A long, arduous, and undoubtedly painful battle. Are you truly prepared for that?" Elara met the lawyer's direct, searching gaze, the image of Julian's shocked, then furious, then finally pleading face flashing vividly in her mind. She took a deep breath, the steel in her spine solidifying. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and stronger now, imbued with a new, hard-won resolve. "Yes, Miss Hayes, I am." Meanwhile, across town, in an equally opulent, though perhaps more overtly masculine office, Julian Thorne was indeed preparing for battle. Panicked, his meticulously curated world spinning wildly off its axis, he'd placed an urgent, almost hysterical call to Mr. Alistair Finch, a name whispered with a mixture of profound awe and considerable trepidation in Ethelberg's most exclusive corporate boardrooms. Finch was a legal titan, a veritable shark in a handmade Savile Row suit, a senior partner at the city's most prestigious, most powerful, and arguably most ruthless corporate law firm, Sterling, Finch, and Blackwood. What Julian in his agitated state didn't know, and what Elara would only discover later to her considerable dismay and sinking heart, was that Hayes & Associates, Evelyn Hayes's much smaller, more specialized firm, was a boutique offshoot. Evelyn Hayes had, in fact, been a rising star at Sterling, Finch, and Blackwood herself, until a significant, though very discreetly handled, professional and ethical disagreement with Alistair Finch himself had led to her acrimonious departure to establish her own practice, specializing in exactly these kinds of high-stakes, high-profile divorces, often against her former colleagues. The stage was unknowingly, and quite deliciously, being set for a particularly acrimonious and potentially very personal legal clash. Finch, a man whose bespoke suits probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, and whose demeanor was as cold, polished, and unforgiving as the marble in his palatial office lobby, listened to Julian's agitated, rambling account of Elara's betrayal and irrationality with an air of barely concealed, bored impatience. "Julian, my dear fellow, your domestic arrangements and their unfortunate unraveling are hardly within my usual purview of mergers and acquisitions," Finch drawled, his voice a silken, condescending purr. "However, a messy, very public divorce, particularly one involving allegations of infidelity and a substantial financial settlement, can have significant and decidedly unwelcome ramifications for Thorne Industries. The board, as you well know, will be exceedingly displeased. Our more conservative investors will undoubtedly get skittish." His advice, when it finally came, was chillingly pragmatic and utterly devoid of any discernible human sentiment. Attempt reconciliation immediately. Make the grand public gesture. Abject apologies, a profusion of flowers, perhaps another obscenely large bauble or two. If she's as emotional and hormonal as you suggest, she might yet be swayed. It's by far the cleaner and significantly less expensive path. However, Finch's voice hardened, losing its silken edge and taking on the quality of chipped flint. "If she remains recalcitrant, if she insists on this folly, then we prepare for scorched earth. We protect your assets, Julian. We protect Thorne Industries at all conceivable costs." And so began Julian's carefully orchestrated, increasingly desperate barrage. Elara's phone, which she now kept mostly on silent, became a conduit for his manipulative, emotionally exhausting attempts at contact. First came the texts, dozens of them, a relentless saccharine flood. "Elara, my love, my life, I'm so desperately sorry. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. Please, please come home. Let's talk." Followed by, "I miss you more than words can say. The penthouse, our beautiful home, feels so cold, so empty without you, without your laughter." Then, when those were met with a wall of resolute silence, the voicemails started, his tone subtly shifting from pleading to aggrieved, then to outright petulant. "How can you do this to us, Elara? To our baby? After everything I've done for you, everything I've given you? Is this how you repay my devotion?" Finally, when all else failed, came the veiled, then not so veiled, threats, delivered with a chilling undertone of his ruthless business persona, the Julian Thorne who crushed competitors without a second thought. "You'll have nothing, Elara, if you go through with this. Absolutely nothing. You think you can survive out there without me? You'll be back in that dreary little town of Willow Creek before the baby's first birthday, mark my words. And then who will be sorry?" Hayes's firm, unequivocal advice, Elara ignored them all, though each manipulative message, each accusatory call, was a fresh, painful stab to her already wounded, bleeding heart. Sarah, bless her fiercely loyal, lion-hearted soul, became her indispensable gatekeeper, her buffer against Julian's escalating toxicity. She screened Elara's calls, deleted the more vitriolic, abusive messages before Elara could even see them, and generally ran interference with a cheerful, indomitable spirit. Sarah's cozy, slightly chaotic, paint-splattered apartment in a less fashionable, but infinitely warmer and more welcoming, part of Athelberg, became Elara's much-needed haven, her sanctuary. The comforting, familiar scent of Sarah's ever-present baking, blueberry muffins one day, decadent chocolate-chip cookies the next, and the cheerful, creative clutter of books, art supplies, vibrant canvases, and numerous half-finished knitting projects were a soothing balm to Elara's frayed, jangled nerves. It was real. It was safe. It was everything the Thorne penthouse was not. One rainy gray afternoon, curled up on Sarah's wonderfully worn faded velvet sofa, a mug of chamomile tea warming her chilled hands, Elara finally made the call she'd been dreading, yet knew she had to make. Her mother, Elara Vance, back in Willow Creek, explaining Julian's profound betrayal, the shocking reality of the impending divorce, to the woman who had genuinely adored Julian, who had seen him as the fairy tale Prince Charming for her only beloved daughter, was one of the hardest, most painful things Elara had ever had to do. Eleanor's initial stunned shock and tearful disbelief had quickly given way to a torrent of heartbroken, disbelieving tears. Then, to Elara's surprise, to a fierce, protective, maternal anger, directed squarely and quite satisfyingly at Julian. That monster. Eleanor had finally sputtered, her voice trembling with a rare fury. How could he? After everything you've given him, oh my poor, poor girl. And then, inevitably, came the heartfelt, tearful offer. There's always a place for you here, my darling. Always. You come home to Willow Creek, we'll take care of you, and we'll take care of this precious baby. You don't need him. Elara had been touched, deeply and profoundly, by her mother's unwavering, unconditional love and support, but the thought of returning to Willow Creek, of retreating to the perceived safety of her childhood home, felt too much like a defeat, a surrender. Not yet. Not while she still had fight left in her. She had to see this through, here in Ethelberg, on her own terms, for her own sake, and for the sake of her child. The emotional toll of it all was immense, a constant, crushing weight. The first trimester's relentless, debilitating morning sickness was significantly amplified by the unrelenting stress, leaving her drained, fragile, and perpetually exhausted. Some days, it was all she could possibly do to drag herself out of bed, to force down a piece of dry toast. But through the debilitating haze of nausea and profound heartache, a new, unexpected strength was being forged, day by painstaking day. Each tiny, fluttering kick of life within her belly, a secret shared only between mother and child, was a powerful, poignant reminder of what and who she was fighting for. This baby, her baby, deserved peace, deserved a life free from turmoil, deserved a mother who was whole, who was strong, who wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next lie, the next calculated betrayal. Her resolve, initially a tiny, flickering, hesitant ember, began to burn with a steady, determined, unquenchable flame. One quiet, introspective evening, as Sarah was out at a late-night pottery class she taught at the local community center, Elara found herself aimlessly sorting through the meager contents of the small leather overnight bag she'd packed in her hasty, desperate flight from the penthouse. Tucked deep inside the inner pocket of an old, familiar tweed jacket, Julian's, she now realized with a sudden, sharp pang of unwelcome memory, a favorite he often wore on their increasingly rare country weekends. How on earth had it gotten mixed up with her few belongings? Had she grabbed it by mistake in her haste? Her fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. A plain, rather thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a simple, unadorned wax disc. Her name, my dearest Elara, was written across the front in an elegant, distinctly feminine, looping script she didn't recognize at all. It was definitely not Julian's familiar, blocky, impatient scrawl. A sudden shiver, cold and deeply unsettling, traced its icy way down her spine. Who could possibly have sent this? And why on earth was it hidden away, forgotten in the pocket of Julian's old jacket? A sense of profound, nameless unease prickled at her skin, a chilling premonition that the already tangled web of Julian's secrets might be far more extensive, far darker, and infinitely more dangerous than she had ever dared to imagine. She stared at the mysterious silent envelope, her heart thudding a nervous, erratic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't open it. Not yet. Some doors, she instinctively, primally felt, were best left resolutely unopened, at least until one was fully, unequivocally prepared for whatever horrors might lie beyond. The weight of it in her hand felt entirely disproportionate to its deceptively modest size, heavy with unspoken words, with the potential for fresh, new sorrows. The comforting silence of Sarah's small, cluttered apartment suddenly pressed in on her. No longer entirely comforting, now tinged with a fresh, sharp layer of unnamed apprehension. Just as she was contemplating whether to burn the damned thing unread or finally give in to the gnawing, insistent curiosity that clawed at her, her phone buzzed sharply on the cluttered coffee table beside her. making her jump with a startled gasp. It was Miss Hayes. Her voice, when Elara answered, was brisk, coolly professional, and held an edge of warning. "Elara, something rather unexpected has come up. It seems Mr. Thorne has decided to, shall we say, insert himself into your upcoming prenatal appointment with Dr. Sharma tomorrow afternoon." Elara's blood ran cold, a sudden icy river of dread. Julian. At her doctor's office. The sheer, unmitigated audacity. The unmitigated gall of the man. The unopened, mysterious envelope lay momentarily forgotten on the sofa beside her, as a new, far more immediate, and infinitely more visceral dread took hold. The looming legal battle was one thing, an abstract concept of lawyers and courtrooms. This felt like a direct, personal invasion, a violation, unwanted encounters, and Julian's desperation. The unsigned envelope, with its elegant, unfamiliar script and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of dried lavender, lay on Sarah's cluttered coffee table, a silent, cream-colored accusation amidst the cheerful, reassuring chaos of overdue library books, half-empty mugs of herbal tea, and Sarah's ever-present knitting needles. Elara had stared at it, turned it over and over in her trembling hands for a full, agonizing day after Miss Hayes's unsettling call. The lawyer's brisk, matter-of-fact announcement about Julian's impending unwelcome ambush at her next prenatal appointment had momentarily, blessedly eclipsed the burgeoning mystery of its contents. But now, the appointment loomed, mere hours away, and the enigmatic envelope felt like a ticking clock, another tightly wound secret in a life already choked, suffocating with them. Would she ever be free of his damn secrets? She'd arrived at Dr. Anya Sharma's Ethelberg City Clinic, located in a discreet, reassuringly expensive medical building, with Sarah, her ever-faithful shadow and emotional bodyguard, by her side. A knot of anxiety, tight and cold as a fist, had been clenching in her chest with every hesitant step into the hushed, antiseptically sterile environment. The waiting room, with its muted pastel walls, its generic, vaguely inspirational art, and its hushed, reverent atmosphere, usually offered a strange sort of calm, a temporary, welcome respite from the turmoil of her life. Not today. Oh, definitely not today. Today, every polite professional smile from a passing nurse, every soft, contented coo from a fellow glowing, expectant mother, felt like a personal affront, a prelude to a confrontation she desperately, with every fiber of her being, wished to avoid. What fresh hell was Julian planning now? And then, the moment she had been both dreading and bracing herself for. As Dr. Sharma, a kind, competent woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a reassuringly no-nonsense demeanor, called her name and opened the door to the private examination room, Elara saw him, and her heart plummeted. There he was, standing beside Dr. Anya Sharma, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, looking for all the world as if he belonged there, as if this were the most natural thing imaginable, as if nothing remotely untoward had ever happened between them. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of Julian Thorne, it seemed, knew no earthly bounds, not even in the sterile, professional calm of a doctor's private office. He was dressed impeccably, of course, in a dark, sober suit that bespoke quiet, understated power, his expression one of carefully calibrated, almost theatrical concern. He even managed to offer Elara a small, tentative, almost shy smile, as if they were still the golden couple, Ethelberg's darlings, merely popping in for a routine, joyful checkup on their much-anticipated first child. The hypocrisy of it made her want to scream, or throw up, possibly both. Shock, hot, furious, and utterly impotent, warred with a weary, bone-deep resignation within Elara. Dr. Sharma, caught completely off guard and clearly uncomfortable, looked distinctly flustered, her usual professional composure noticeably strained. "Elara," the doctor began, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. "Mr. Thorne, expressed his strong desire to be present for today's appointment. He, said he wanted to ensure everything was progressing well with you and the baby." The unspoken, and he rather forcefully insisted, and frankly, I didn't know how to refuse him without causing a scene, hung heavy and awkward in the air between them. Julian stepped forward slightly, his movement smooth, confident, proprietary. "I have a right to be here, Elara," he said, his voice a masterpiece of feigned wounded solicitude, the kind he usually reserved for particularly recalcitrant board members. "I'm concerned, deeply concerned, about you, about our baby." There it was again. Those two words, once a source of such profound, shared joy and excited anticipation, now felt like another carefully chosen weapon, another insidious claim, another invisible chain he was trying to use to bind her to him, to his will. Elara wanted to scream at him, to demand he leave immediately, to rail against this outrageous violation of what should have been her private, her sacred space. But the main waiting room, filled with other curious patients and their families, was just outside the partially open door. Other lives, other dramas, unfolding. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction, the leverage of a public scene. Swallowing her fury, a bitter acrid taste in her mouth, she gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod towards the visitor's chair in the corner. "Fine," she managed, her voice tight, clipped, betraying none of the turmoil raging within. "Let him stay, if Dr. Sharma has no objection." The doctor, looking immensely relieved, quickly ushered them both in. The examination proceeded under a cloud of palpable, almost unbearable tension. Julian sat in the designated chair in the corner, uncharacteristically, unnervingly silent, his gaze fixed intently, unblinkingly on Elara, then shifting to the large ultrasound monitor as Dr. Sharma, with practiced gentle expertise, moved the cool gel-covered transducer across Elara's burgeoning belly. The room suddenly filled with the rhythmic, powerful, whooshing sound of a tiny, yet incredibly strong heartbeat, their baby's heartbeat. Elara's own heart clenched, a painful, bittersweet spasm. Despite everything, despite all the lies, the betrayals, the crushing heartache, that sound, that undeniable miraculous proof of the new life flourishing within her, was a profound, undeniable miracle. A single hot tear escaped from the corner of her eye and traced a slow, burning path down her temple into her hair. She saw, out of the very corner of her eye, Julian's throat work convulsively as he swallowed hard, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair with surprising force. His eyes, when she dared to risk a fleeting glance in his direction, were suspiciously bright, reflecting the flickering, monochrome images on the screen. For that one, fleeting, exquisitely fragile moment, suspended in time, they weren't warring spouses, not billionaire tycoon and betrayed, discarded wife, but simply two people, awestruck, humbled, and undeniably moved by the profound, terrifying mystery of creation. A shared emotion, so powerful, so unexpected, it almost took her breath away. Could there still be something there? A flicker? But such moments, especially fragile, unbidden ones, are by their very nature ephemeral, like morning mist. The instant Dr. Sharma, after offering warm, professional reassurances that everything with the baby looked absolutely perfect and wonderfully healthy, excused herself with a discreet smile to give them a moment alone to discuss things, the spell was irrevocably broken. The sterile, professional calm of the examination room once again became a potential battleground. The air thickened. Julian was on his feet, moving towards her, before the door had even fully clicked shut behind the departing doctor. He approached Elara, who was still lying on the examination table, feeling suddenly, intensely vulnerable, exposed, like a butterfly pinned to a board. He didn't try to touch her, not yet, but his very presence, his nearness, filled the small antiseptic space, suffocating her, stealing the air from her lungs. "Elara," he began, his voice low, urgent, laced with a raw, desperate sincerity she'd never ever heard from him before. It was almost convincing. "Please, we need to talk. Really talk. Without the lawyers, without the anger." "There's nothing left to say that hasn't already been said, Julian," she replied, her voice weary, heavy, as she slowly, carefully sat up, pulling the thin paper sheet more securely around her, a flimsy shield against his intensity. "Don't say that. Please don't say that." He ran a hand distractedly through his perfectly styled hair, the gesture no longer one of casual confidence or calculated disarray, but of genuine, profound agitation. "I know I messed up. God, Elara, I know I did. I've been a fool, an arrogant, selfish, unforgivable fool, but I can change. I swear to you, I will change." His eyes, those captivating, once-adored blue eyes that had so easily held her entire world captive, pleaded with her, shimmering with unshed tears. "I'll go to therapy, Elara. I swear I will. I'll do whatever it takes. We can find the best therapist in Ethelberg. Hell, in the entire world, if that's what you want. Money is no object." He gestured expansively, a fleeting glimpse of the old, all-powerful Julian peeking through the cracks in his crumbling facade. "And that disastrous new venture, the one that caused all this trouble, the one that took all my time, all my attention? I'll sell my shares. Today, I'll walk away from it completely, I swear. It's done, it's over. It never ever meant more to me than you, than us, than our family. Elara looked at him, her expression unreadable, a cold, hard knot forming in the pit of her stomach. The new venture. Was that his latest, carefully crafted euphemism for the woman in the scarlet dress at the Gilded Lily? For the lingering, offensive scent of exotic bloom perfume that had haunted her dreams? Or was it, as she increasingly suspected, something else entirely, something far more complex, far more dangerous? He must have seen the profound skepticism, the weariness in her eyes, because he pressed on, his voice cracking now with a desperate urgency. That whole damned Phoenix account mess, it was a mistake, Elara, a terrible, colossal lapse in judgment, a stupid, reckless temptation I couldn't or didn't resist, a gamble that went spectacularly, disastrously wrong. But it's over now. I swear to you, it's over. It was never meant to hurt you, to touch our life. It was just business, bad business. The Phoenix account. The name, once just a vaguely ominous whisper overheard in the dead of night, now echoed in her mind with a chilling resonance, conjuring the memory of his hushed, furious phone call. This problem needs to be silenced permanently. This was no mere bad investment or a simple fleeting temptation. This felt deeper, darker, far more sinister. Whatever the Phoenix account truly was, it wasn't just about money, she was certain of it. It smelled of danger. Your promises are empty, Julian, she said, her voice gaining a cold, hard, almost brittle edge. They always have been. This isn't about one failed venture or one fleeting temptation, as you so quaintly put it. This is about your fundamental character, Julian. It's about who you are, deep down, when the masks come off. And I'm beginning to realize, to my eternal regret, that I don't think I ever truly knew that person. Perhaps that person never even existed outside of my own foolish, hopeful imagination. He flinched, as if she'd physically struck him across the face. He took another hesitant, unsteady step closer, his hand, trembling slightly, reaching out, as if to touch her belly, to connect with the child they had created in happier, more innocent times. Elara, our child, please. She recoiled instinctively, sharply, pulling away from his outstretched hand as if from a venomous snake, from a burning flame. The rejection was stark, unequivocal, brutal. Julian's broad shoulders slumped. He looked, for the very first time since she'd known him, genuinely, utterly broken. The arrogant confidence, the unshakable self-assurance, the master of the universe aura, it was all gone, stripped away, replaced by a raw, painful, almost boyish vulnerability that was, paradoxically, almost harder for her to witness than his anger had been. Actual tears welled in his brilliant blue eyes, and this time, he didn't bother to wipe them away. They spilled over, tracing shimmering paths down his usually impassive, handsome face. I'm losing everything, Elara, he whispered, his voice choked, ragged with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Despair? Self-pity? Genuine remorse? Don't you see? I'm losing you. And I can't. A tiny, treacherous part of her, the foolish, romantic, forgiving part she thought had died a painful death that night in the penthouse, ached at the sight of his undeniable pain. But the stronger, newly forged, fiercely protective part, the part that was now, above all else, a mother, knew with a chilling certainty that this was either another exquisitely crafted performance, or, even worse, the desperate last-ditch plea of a man who only truly valued what he was on the verge of irrevocably losing. Shaken to her core, but firm, absolutely firm, in her hard-won resolve, Elara slowly, carefully slid off the examination table, her legs feeling surprisingly unsteady beneath her. I have to go, Julian. She walked out of the room, out of the clinic's hushed, sterile corridors, out into the indifferent bustle of the Ethelberg afternoon, leaving him standing there, a fallen, diminished titan amidst the cold, sterile white, the faint, rhythmic whoosh of their child's heartbeat still echoing in the suddenly silent room. Later that evening, back in the comforting, slightly chaotic sanctuary of Sarah's apartment, the ever-present city lights of Ethelberg, a distant, almost unreal twinkle beyond the rain-streaked window pane, Elara finally, with trembling fingers, picked up the mysterious, waiting, cream-colored envelope. The scent of dried lavender was stronger now, almost poignant. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she broke the simple, unmarked wax seal. Inside, there was a single sheet of thick, obviously expensive, decal-edged paper, folded neatly in thirds. As she carefully unfolded it, a tiny, perfectly pressed, faded forget-me-not flower, its delicate blue muted and softened with age, fluttered out from between the folds and landed gently on her lap. Her breath caught in her throat. Forget-me-nots, her beloved grandmother's favorite flower, a flower symbolizing true love, remembrance. Then she saw the writing. The same elegant, almost painfully familiar, looping script as on the envelope. It was a poem, exquisitely written, achingly, heartbreakingly sad, about a love that was lost but would never be forgotten, about an enduring, unquenchable hope against all conceivable odds, and woven through it, a subtle, almost imperceptible thread of profound warning about gathering shadows and carefully concealed deceit. It was, of course, unsigned. Just the words, hanging in the suddenly still air of Sarah's living room, heavy with unspoken emotion, with untold stories. Elara read it once, then twice, then a third time, a cold, creeping dread mixed with a strange, poignant, inexplicable sorrow seeping deep into her bones. Who on earth could have sent this? When? And why, oh why, was it tucked away, forgotten, in the pocket of Julian's old tweed jacket? Was it from a past lover of his, someone he'd loved and lost, or perhaps callously discarded? Or was it somehow meant for her, a cryptic, anonymous message from an unknown, perhaps well-meaning sympathizer? The questions swirled around her, a dizzying, nauseating vortex of confusion and profound unease. Her gaze fell upon the small, ornate silver locket, still clutched tightly in her hand from her visit to the clinic earlier that day. Julian's long-ago gift. The locket he'd once said symbolized their unbreakable bond, their most precious, shared secrets. Suddenly it felt incredibly, urgently significant. Could it possibly be connected to this mysterious letter, to this unknown poet? She'd always been frustrated, vaguely intrigued, that it didn't seem to open. Had she simply missed something all these years? Had she been too trusting, too blind? She turned it over and over in her fingers, her thumb tracing the familiar, intricate carvings of the twining vines and tiny, almost hidden stars, a pattern she'd always found both exquisitely beautiful and, in a strange way, slightly suffocating, restrictive. And then she saw it, or rather felt it. A tiny, almost invisible, almost imperceptible indentation along the edge of one of the intricately carved leaves, something her questing fingers had undoubtedly passed over countless times before, but never truly registered, never consciously noted. Holding her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she pressed it gently, tentatively, with the tip of her fingernail. There was a faint, almost inaudible click. A tiny, almost invisible clasp, cunningly, cleverly hidden within the elaborate, chaste design, had sprung open. Her heart hammered against her ribs with a force that actually hurt. What secrets did this locket, this long-held token of a now-shattered love, truly hold? And what, dear God, what would they mean for her baby, for the terrifying, gathering storm that she sensed was undoubtedly still brewing on the dark horizon? Just as she fumbled with the now open, surprisingly heavy clasp, her phone, lying innocuously on the arm of the worn velvet sofa, vibrated sharply with an incoming call. It was Miss Hayes. "Elara," the lawyer's voice was brisk, all business. "Miss Iris Holloway, the court-appointed mediator, has set a date for your first joint session with Mr. Thorne and his esteemed counsel, Mr. Finch. It's scheduled for next Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. sharp." The locket felt suddenly, shockingly cold in her hand, a dead weight. One mystery, the legal battle for her freedom and her child's future, was about to be confronted head-on, even as another, far more enigmatic and potentially far more dangerous one, was just terrifyingly beginning to unfurl. Mediation, revelations, and a fragile truce. The silver locket, now yielding its secrets, felt both a potent talisman and a deeply unsettling threat in Elara's trembling hand. The small hidden clasp had given way to reveal not a miniature portrait, as she might have once naively imagined in the early, sun-drenched days of her marriage, but something far more enigmatic. Miss Hayes's call about the mediation date, next Tuesday, 10 a.m. sharp, with a Miss Iris Holloway presiding, had been a stark, unwelcome reminder that Julian's world, the cold, calculating world of high-stakes negotiations, powerful lawyers, and carefully worded non-disclosure agreements, was about to collide head-on with her own raw, fractured, emotionally charged reality. The intervening days were a blur of anxious, meticulous preparation, of huddled, whispered consultations with Ms. Hayes in her discreet, reassuringly expensive offices, and long, sleepless nights where the cryptic message from the soon-to-be-opened locket and the haunting words of the anonymous poem, along with the faded forget-me-not, played on a relentless, exhausting loop in her tired mind. He is not who you think. The phoenix will consume him. Be careful. A friend. A friend? Or something far more sinister. A shadowy player in a game whose rules she didn't even begin to understand. The not knowing was a torment. The mediation room, when Tuesday finally, inevitably arrived, was a veritable battleground of thinly veiled hostility, forced, brittle smiles, and a multitude of unspoken, venomous accusations. Julian Thorne, her husband, her soon-to-be ex, sat across the gleaming, ridiculously oversized mahogany conference table, looking like a deposed king about to lose the last vestiges of his once unassailable empire. And Elara, his heavily pregnant, estranged queen, clutched her leather briefcase containing not a crown, but what felt like the final, irrevocable decree of their shared, shattered fairy tale. The space itself was aggressively neutral, a sleek, minimalist, characterless suite in a downtown high-rise, all muted grays, brushed steel, and soulless abstract art, a room meticulously designed to soothe, to facilitate, to encourage compromise. But no amount of calming, Zen-inspired decor could possibly dispel the suffocating, palpable tension that crackled and sparked in the air like downed power lines in a thunderstorm. Miss Iris Holloway, the mediator, was a woman in her late 50s, Elara guessed, with a carefully cultivated reputation for an almost preternatural calm and an uncanny, almost unnerving ability to find common ground, some sliver of agreement where none, absolutely none, seemed to logically exist. She greeted them all, Elara and Miss Hayes, Julian and the formidable Mr. Alastair Finch. With a polite, coolly impartial smile, her very presence a small, isolated island of determined professionalism, in a roiling, treacherous sea of barely suppressed emotion. Elara sat ramrod straight, a posture of defiance she didn't entirely feel, beside Miss Hayes, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white, a desperate attempt to still their persistent, betraying tremor. She'd chosen a simple, elegant navy maternity dress, an unconscious effort, perhaps, to project an aura of quiet dignity, of unshakable resolve. Across the gleaming, reflective expanse of polished mahogany, Julian looked diminished, deflated. The usual arrogant, confident glint in his brilliant blue eyes was noticeably dulled, replaced by a haggard, almost haunted wariness that tugged, most unwelcomely, at something deep inside her. Dark, bruised-looking circles smudged beneath his eyes, and his expensive, custom-tailored suit seemed to hang a little loosely, a little forlornly, on his usually powerful frame. Beside him, Mr. Alastair Finch, Julian's legal Rottweiler, was the absolute epitome of icy, reptilian composure, his sharp, predatory gaze missing nothing, taking in every flicker of emotion, every nuance of the room. The man exuded a chilling, almost palpable competence that made Elara's skin crawl and her stomach churn with a fresh wave of nausea. This was not going to be easy. Miss Holloway, her voice calm and modulated, began by outlining the rules of engagement. Absolute respect for all parties, a genuine willingness to negotiate in good faith, and strict confidentiality regarding all matters discussed. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod from the mediator, the battle well and truly commenced. Miss Hayes, her own voice crisp, clear, and authoritative, a stark contrast to Miss Holloway's soothing tones, laid out Elara's demands with surgical precision. Substantial, ongoing alimony, befitting the wife of Julian Thorne, a man whose vast fortune was a matter of very public record. Comprehensive, ironclad child support, to be placed in trust, including detailed provisions for education, health care, and future financial well-being, ensuring their child would want for nothing. And, crucially, exclusive occupancy of the Ethelbert penthouse for at least 1 year post-birth. To provide a stable, secure, and familiar environment for Elara and the newborn during that critical first year. She also, as a final, non-negotiable point, formally requested that Julian cover all of Elara's considerable and rapidly escalating legal fees. Each demand was delivered with irrefutable logic, with quiet confidence, backed by the implicit, unspoken threat of the considerable evidence of adultery and emotional cruelty they held in reserve. Mr. Alastair Finch listened, his expression utterly unreadable, his steepled fingers resting lightly on the table before him. Then, when Miss Hayes had concluded, it was his turn. He countered with an offer for alimony that was so insultingly, laughably low, it was clearly designed more as a provocation than a serious opening bid. It was a figure that barely acknowledged Elara's years as Julian's wife, his partner, the woman who had stood by his side during his meteoric rise. He pushed hard, with a chilling lack of empathy, for immediate 50-50 shared custody of the yet-to-be-born child, painting a ridiculously sentimental, utterly false picture of Julian as a doting, devoted, heartbroken father-to-be, who was being cruelly, unreasonably denied access to his precious child by an emotional, unstable, and clearly vindictive wife. He even had the unmitigated gall, the sheer effrontery, to subtly suggest that Elara's current delicate emotional state, no doubt exacerbated by her pregnancy, might render her an unsuitable, perhaps even unreliable primary caregiver in the long term. The vile, poisonous implication hung there in the sterile air, ugly, offensive, and deliberately wounding. Elara felt the blood drain from her face, a wave of pure, unadulterated rage, so potent it almost choked her, rising in her throat. She felt Miss Hayes's hand briefly, reassuringly on her arm beneath the table. Julian, despite Finch's obvious, almost puppet master-like control over the proceedings, kept trying to interject, to speak directly, desperately, to Elara, his voice laced with a raw, pleading, almost theatrical tone that grated on her already frayed nerves. "Elara, please," he'd begin, leaning forward across the vast table, his usually piercing blue eyes seeking hers, trying to re-establish that old, familiar, fatally captivating connection. "Can't we just talk, you and I, please, without them?" He gestured dismissively towards the lawyers. "I still love you, Elara, more than anything. This is our baby we're talking about, our future." Each time, Miss Hayes would gently, but with an underlying firmness that was unmistakable, redirect him. "Mr. Thorne, please, I must insist you address your comments through the mediator or your designated counsel. Ms. Vance's position and her requests have been made abundantly clear." Elara, steadfastly following her lawyer's earlier explicit advice, kept her gaze fixed resolutely on Miss Holloway, or on a nondescript, abstract painting on the far wall, refusing to meet Julian's pleading, manipulative eyes, refusing to be drawn back into his emotional vortex, the one that had almost drowned her before. It was an excruciating, exhausting exercise in supreme self-control. Every instinct, every frayed nerve, every shattered piece of her heart screamed at her to respond, to rage, to weep, to unleash the torrent of pain and betrayal he had inflicted. But she held fast, a pale, trembling statue of brittle, hard-won composure. The morning crawled by at a glacial, agonizing pace, a grueling, spirit-crushing exchange of offers and counteroffers, of thinly veiled accusations wrapped in impenetrable legal jargon, and of powerful, roiling emotional undercurrents that constantly threatened to capsize the entire fragile proceeding. Miss Iris Holloway, true to her stellar reputation, navigated these treacherous, shark-infested waters with admirable, almost superhuman skill and patience. But by midday, it was clear they were at a significant, seemingly insurmountable impasse, primarily over the contentious issues of ongoing financial support and the future custody arrangements for their unborn child. With a small, weary sigh, she called for a 1-hour recess. "Perhaps some time apart, and a light lunch, will allow for cooler, more constructive heads to prevail," she suggested, her calm, even voice a soothing, welcome balm on everyone's frayed, jangled nerves. Elara retreated with Miss Hayes to a small, sterile, windowless anteroom. Her lawyer offered quiet words of encouragement, astute observations on Finch's tactics, and potential strategies for the afternoon session, but Elara's mind, her focus, was elsewhere. The locket, the note, she needed to know. Excusing herself with a murmured apology, she went to the surprisingly opulent ladies' room down the corridor, her heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her fingers, surprisingly steady now despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, fumbled for a moment with the tiny, almost invisible clasp on the silver locket, the one she'd so miraculously discovered only days ago. It sprang open with a faint, satisfying click. Inside, nestled securely against the slightly tarnished, intricately chased silver, wasn't a miniature portrait of a forgotten love, as she might have once, in her naivety, imagined. Instead, there was a tiny, exquisitely, tightly folded square of what looked like old, very fragile, almost translucent parchment. With painstaking, almost reverent care, holding her breath, she unfolded it. The elegant, looping, undeniably feminine script was the same as on the mysterious envelope she'd found in Julian's jacket, the same as on the poignant, unsigned poem. The message itself was short, stark, and chillingly direct. He is not who you think. The phoenix will consume him. Be careful. A friend. Elara stared at the faded, spidery words, the blood draining from her face, a sudden icy wave of comprehension, and yet, simultaneously, profound confusion washing over her. He is not who you think, an understatement of truly epic, heartbreaking proportions. The phoenix will consume him. The phoenix. Julian's hushed, furious, terrified words on the phone from months ago replayed in her mind with horrifying clarity. The phoenix account is a liability. This problem needs to be silenced permanently. And then his desperate, dismissive explanation at the clinic just last week. That whole Phoenix account mess, it was a mistake, Elara, a terrible lapse in judgment, a temptation I couldn't resist. A temptation? Or something far more dangerous, something all-consuming, something that could utterly destroy him and perhaps everyone around him. And the stark, ominous warning, be careful. Signed simply, enigmatically, a friend. But whose friend? Hers? Or a former, perhaps deeply betrayed and now vengeful friend or associate of Julian's? The ambiguity, the not knowing, was terrifying, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. A cold, almost paralyzing dread seeped deep into her bones, but with it, rather unexpectedly, came a strange, almost electrifying surge of adrenaline, of sharpened, laser-like resolve. This wasn't just about Julian's sordid infidelities anymore, was it? This hinted at something infinitely darker, something potentially far more dangerous, something that could, she now realized with a sickening lurch, potentially endanger not only Julian himself, but by devastating extension, her and their innocent, unborn child. Her child. The thought, as always, was a steel rod suddenly inserted down her spine, a source of unimaginable, unexpected strength. She would protect her baby, no matter what, no matter the cost. She carefully, meticulously refolded the tiny cryptic note, tucked it securely back into the locket's hidden compartment, and snapped the intricate clasp firmly shut. The weight of it against her skin was no longer just a melancholic reminder of a beautiful, lost love, but a constant, urgent, pressing reminder of a gathering, ominous storm. When they reconvened in the mediation room an hour later, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible, yet definite shift in Elara's demeanor. Her outward composure was still perfectly intact, perhaps even more so than before, but her eyes, when they briefly, coolly met Julian's across the table, held a new, unreadable, almost unnerving depth, a glint of something, knowledge, power, that made even the unflappable Mr. Alistair Finch pause for a fraction of a second, his sharp, assessing gaze lingering on her a moment longer than necessary. The negotiations resumed, Julian once again attempting, with a growing air of desperation, to portray himself as the beleaguered victim of circumstance, a man making immense, painful business sacrifices. In a noble effort to try and salvage his crumbling personal life, a fundamentally good man who had perhaps under extreme, unrelenting pressure made a few minor, regrettable errors in judgment. Theatrics. All of it. It was then that Elara, quite unexpectedly, spoke. Her voice was quiet, dangerously soft, but it carried across the polished expanse of the mahogany table with an unnerving, almost shocking clarity. She addressed Julian directly, completely ignoring Miss Hayes's subtle, warning frown from beside her. "Sacrifices, Julian?" she said, her gaze level, unwavering, pinning him like an insect under a microscope. "Or are you perhaps just, shall we say, frantically trying to ensure you manage to escape the all-consuming flames of the phoenix before it utterly consumes everything in its path? Including, I can't help but wonder, Julian, our innocent child's future financial security." The effect of her words was instantaneous and electrifying. Julian went deathly, ash-gray pale, his jaw physically slackening. He looked as if she'd reached across the table and slapped him hard. He stammered, his eyes darting wildly. "Well, what are you possibly talking about? Phoenix? I have no idea what you mean." His denial was pathetically unconvincing, even to his own ears. Mr. Alistair Finch's head snapped sharply towards Julian, his eyes narrowed to dangerous, icy slits, sharp as shards of broken ice. "Julian?" he queried, his voice dangerously soft, a silken menace. "Is there perhaps something pertinent you may have neglected to fully share with your legal counsel regarding the more intricate details of your various business ventures?" The power dynamic in the room had subtly yet irrevocably and quite deliciously shifted. Elara didn't know the full story, not by a long shot, not yet. But she knew something, and Julian knew she knew. And now, more importantly, so did his expensive, formidable lawyer. The remainder of the afternoon session progressed with a new, almost frantic, and certainly uncharacteristic sense of urgency from Julian's side of the table. Mr. Finch, after a brief, intense, and clearly very uncomfortable whispered conference with his now visibly sweating and agitated client, became surprisingly, almost miraculously, more amenable to constructive negotiation. It seemed the mere unexpected mention of the mysterious phoenix, whatever it truly was, had profoundly spooked them both. By late afternoon, after several more hours of intense, though now significantly more productive wrangling, a tentative preliminary agreement had been painstakingly hammered out. It wasn't everything Elara had initially, perhaps naively, hoped for, but it was substantial. It was a victory. A significant monthly support sum for herself and the child, enough to ensure their comfort and security. She would retain exclusive occupancy of the Ethelberg penthouse for 1 full year after the baby's birth, after which it would be sold, with a significantly more favorable split of the considerable proceeds allocated to her. Julian, it was agreed, would have liberal, though very carefully stipulated and supervised, visitation rights with their child. Joint legal custody for all key decisions regarding the child's upbringing, health, and education remained a bitter, almost unbearable pill for Elara to swallow, but Miss Hayes, with a reassuring squeeze of her hand, assured her it was largely standard procedure in such cases, and they could, and would, vigorously fight any unreasonable demands or decisions from Julian later, if necessary. Julian, looking utterly defeated, a mere shadow of his former arrogant, domineering self, signed the preliminary agreement with a visibly trembling hand, his usual flourish entirely absent. As they were all finally, exhaustedly packing up their briefcases and files, the lawyers exchanging stiff, coolly professional, and pointedly brief pleasantries, Julian managed to catch Elara's eye from across the room, gesturing almost imperceptibly, with a slight inclination of his head, towards the corridor outside. Against her better, more cautious judgment, and despite Miss Hayes's subtle, almost invisible warning glance, Elara found herself allowing him a brief, strained moment alone as they waited for the elevator, standing slightly apart from their respective, now silently conferring, legal teams. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, husky, strained. "Elara, I truly never wanted to involve you, or the baby in that." He gestured vaguely, uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the empty corridor as if afraid of being overheard. "Even now. The Phoenix, it's complicated, it's dangerous, far more than you can imagine, but I will protect you both. I swear it. No matter what it costs me, Elara. You have to believe that." His words, meant perhaps as some sort of belated, inadequate reassurance, sent a fresh, unwelcome chill down her already icy spine. Was it a genuine, heartfelt promise? A fleeting, desperate flicker of the man she thought she'd once married? The man she had once loved beyond all reason? Or was it something else entirely? A veiled threat, perhaps? A subtle, chilling warning to stay quiet, to not dig any deeper into the dangerous, labyrinthine secrets the locket had so unexpectedly, so disturbingly, begun to unveil. She didn't know. And that, she realized with a fresh, sickening wave of dread, was perhaps the most terrifying, most unsettling thing of all. The elevator finally arrived, its polished chrome doors sighing open with a soft, indifferent hiss. The ink on the tentative settlement agreement was still fresh, a fragile, hard-won truce in a brutal, soul-destroying war that felt, deep in her bones, far, far from over. The profound, unnerving mystery of the anonymous friend, the true, dangerous nature of the shadowy Phoenix account, and Julian's deeply ambiguous, unsettling parting words loomed large and menacing, casting long, ominous and decidedly unwelcome shadows over her fragile, hard-won, and still terrifyingly uncertain independence. A new dawn, lingering shadows, and the promise of tomorrow. The ink on the settlement was drying, a stark black signature, Julian Thorne. sprawling with a defeated flourish across a ream of paper that formally, irrevocably, and with brutal legalistic precision, ended her marriage. But the ink on the secret note, the one she had carefully, with trembling fingers, coaxed from the hidden compartment of the silver locket, felt indelible, its cryptic, chilling warning about the phoenix and an unknown, enigmatic friend, a permanent, unsettling brand on Elara's weary psyche. One chapter of her life, the one titled so hopefully, so naively, Mrs. Julian Thorne, had slammed shut with the final echoing thud of a judge's gavel in a sterile Ethelberg courtroom. But another, far more mysterious, infinitely more complex, and undeniably unsettling one, was just, it seemed, beginning to unfurl, its pages still terrifyingly, exhilaratingly blank. What now, indeed? The divorce was final. A sterile, multi-page document couched in impenetrable legalese, marking the official, unceremonious end of a love story that had once burned so fiercely, so blindingly bright, consuming her entirely in its initial, intoxicating blaze, only to leave her in the end, sifting through the cold, bitter ashes of betrayal and deceit. But for Elara Vance, she had reclaimed her maiden name, her own name, with a quiet, fierce, almost defiant satisfaction the moment the judge's words were uttered. It was, in a very real sense, the first true day of a new life, a life she alone would define, on her own terms, by her own rules. Even as the long, dark, ominous shadows from Julian's complicated, dangerous, and still largely unknown past still flickered insistently, uncomfortably, at the very edges of her hard-won, fragile peace. Could they ever truly be escaped? Weeks later, the relentless, unforgiving Ethelberg city summer had finally, blessedly, mellowed into the crisp, poignant gold of early autumn. Central Park was a riot of crimson and amber, and the air, for the first time in months, felt clean, breathable. Elara found herself, much to her own surprise, actually settling into a new, much smaller, but infinitely more welcoming apartment in a tree-lined, charmingly bohemian, quieter part of the city. It was a neighborhood filled with young, hopeful families, quirky independent bookstores that smelled of old paper and new ideas, and the distant, cheerful, life-affirming sounds of children laughing as they played in nearby sun-dappled parks. It was, in every conceivable way, a world away from the glacial, echoing opulence and suffocating, soul-destroying silence of the Thorne family penthouse. Here, sunlight, real, unfiltered, golden sunlight, streamed generously through large, slightly dusty, charmingly imperfect windows, illuminating the happy, creative chaos of still unpacked boxes, half-assembled, flat-packed baby furniture, and numerous canvases, some blank, some bearing the tentative, hopeful first strokes of new creations, leaning expectantly against freshly painted walls. She'd painted the small, sun-filled nursery a soft, buttery, optimistic yellow, and a whimsical, enchanting mural of friendly, smiling woodland creatures. A gentle fox, a wise old owl, a family of playful squirrels, was slowly, joyfully beginning to take shape on one entire wall. It was a warm, deeply nurturing, loving space, a sanctuary she was painstakingly, lovingly building with her own two hands, for herself and for the tiny, precious new life that kicked and squirmed and hiccuped contentedly within her, a constant, beloved, reassuring presence in her suddenly quiet world. Occasionally, while scrolling somewhat listlessly through the online news on her tablet over a solitary, simple breakfast of whole wheat toast and freshly squeezed orange juice, she'd see Julian's name, his handsome, brooding face staring out at her from the financial pages. Thorne Industries, it was invariably reported in carefully coded, deliberately opaque financial jargon, was facing unexpected and significant financial turbulence, and increased, unwelcome regulatory scrutiny from several international agencies. The Phoenix account, Elara suspected with a grim, almost detached certainty, was finally beginning to rise spectacularly from its long-hidden ashes, and not, she imagined, in a way that Julian, or his equally formidable lawyer, Mr. Finch, would remotely appreciate. A strange, unwelcome, and entirely inappropriate flicker of grim satisfaction warred briefly with a lingering, unwelcome, and equally inappropriate flicker of concern? Pity, perhaps? He was, after all, despite everything, still the father of her child, a child who would one day undoubtedly ask difficult questions. Julian, true to the letter, if not perhaps the spirit, of their meticulously, painfully negotiated settlement, attended the subsequent prenatal appointments with Dr. Anya Sharma. His demeanor during these brief, awkward encounters was a carefully constructed, almost unrecognizable mask of subdued, almost deferential respectfulness. He kept a polite, almost formal distance. His questions, and there were surprisingly few, directed mostly at the doctor. His eyes, when they chanced, inevitably, to meet Elara's across the sterile examination room, holding a complex, unreadable mixture of profound regret, deep, abiding sadness, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. Fear, perhaps. Or was it shame? There was an unspoken, fragile truce between them now. A tentative, arm's-length, carefully choreographed attempt at future co-parenting for the undeniable sake of the innocent child they would soon share. These encounters were invariably awkward, stilted, fraught with unspoken words and unresolved emotions, but they were, Elara knew, in the long run, necessary. She navigated them with a cool, polite, almost regal detachment, her focus solely, fiercely on the well-being of her baby. Nothing else mattered now. Her own well-being, for so long neglected, so carelessly sacrificed on the altar of Julian's ambition, and her own misguided love, became her absolute, non-negotiable priority. She discovered, much to her surprise, the quiet, centering solace of prenatal yoga, the simple, grounding pleasure of preparing and eating healthy, home-cooked meals, filled with fresh vegetables from the local farmer's market. She started journaling again, an old, forgotten habit from her more carefree art school days, filling page after page of a beautiful, leather-bound notebook Sarah had given her, with her swirling, chaotic thoughts, her deeply buried fears, her tentatively burgeoning hopes, slowly, painfully, but surely, rediscovering her own authentic voice, her own unique narrative, entirely separate and distinct from the suffocating, gilded one Julian had so expertly, so cruelly, tried to impose upon her for so long. Today, the baby kicked when I was sketching by the window, a strong, definite, joyful thump right under my ribs, she wrote one sun-drenched afternoon, a small, genuine smile finally playing on her lips. Perhaps it's a sign. Perhaps this little one is an artist too, or maybe just impatient to arrive. Whatever it is, for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I feel a stirring, a real stirring of hope. Sarah, of course, her beautiful, bohemian, fiercely loyal Sarah, remained her absolute rock, her constant, unwavering source of emotional support, terrible, groan-inducing jokes, surprisingly insightful advice, and an endless supply of freshly baked, comfort-laden cookies. She was there with a shared container of outrageously expensive ice cream and a truly terrible B-grade reality television marathon on the long, dark, lonely nights when the silence of the small apartment felt overwhelming, when the ghosts of the past threatened to overwhelm Elara's fragile, newfound peace. And she was there, just as reliably, with a practical, no-nonsense, roll-up-her-sleeves approach, when Elara dithered, hormonally and indecisively, over nursery paint colors, crib assembly instructions, or the relative merits of cloth versus disposable diapers. Her mother, the indefatigable Elara Vance, made several extended trips from the comforting familiarity of Willow Creek, her visits a welcome, soothing cocoon of familiar, nostalgic scents. Freshly baked apple pie from the old family recipe, her signature, old-fashioned rosewater hand cream, and an endless supply of down-to-earth, eminently practical, Willow Creek common sense. Eleanor, bless her, never once uttered the words, "I told you so" about Julian, though Elara sometimes saw a flicker of that sentiment, mixed with a profound maternal sorrow, in the knowing, loving depths of her mother's kind blue eyes. Instead, she simply offered unconditional love, endless patience, practical help with organizing the mountains of baby things that were slowly taking over Elara's small apartment, and a quiet, fierce, almost palpable pride in her daughter's hard-won, remarkable resilience. "You were always so much stronger than you ever thought you were, Elara May," she'd said softly one afternoon, her calloused, loving hand gently resting on Elara's swollen, vibrant belly. "This precious little one is so very, very lucky to have you for a mother." Elara had actually believed her. The profound, unsettling mystery of the anonymous friend, the beautifully penned, enigmatic locket, the haunting, unsigned poem, and the cryptic, chilling note about the all-consuming phoenix, however, remained an unresolved, discordant chord, a dissonant, unsettling note in the slowly, gradually healing symphony of Elara's new, independent life. There were still days, and more often, long sleepless nights, when the insistent, gnawing urge to investigate, to try and uncover the hidden truth behind the veiled warnings and Julian's terrified reaction, was almost overwhelming. Who was this person who clearly knew Julian's darkest, most dangerous secrets? What, exactly, was the Phoenix account, and why did it inspire such palpable, visceral fear in a man like Julian Thorne? A man who seemingly feared nothing and no one. But then she would feel the baby move restlessly within her, a gentle, insistent, loving reminder of her most sacred, most important priority. And so, Elara made a conscious, deliberate decision. For now, for the sake of her own sanity and her child's peaceful gestation, she would let the ominous, lurking shadows lie undisturbed. Peace for herself and for her unborn, innocent child was paramount. Everything else could wait. She kept the ornate silver locket, the elegantly penned cryptic note, and the fragile, faded pressed forget-me-not flower safe tucked away carefully at the bottom of a small, antique, intricately carved wooden box her beloved grandfather had made for her as a child. A silent, potent testament to a turbulent, painful chapter of her life that was now, finally, blessedly closed, but would never, could never, be entirely forgotten or erased. It was a loose end, a tantalizing thread of unresolved intrigue that still tugged, occasionally and insistently, at the very edges of her consciousness. A subtle, constant reminder that some stories, some lives, don't always have neat, tidy, easily explained endings. And perhaps she was beginning to understand that was okay. One crisp, sun-drenched, impossibly beautiful autumn afternoon, sunlight, rich and golden as honey, slanting warmly through the large picture window of the nearly completed butter-yellow nursery, Elara found herself wrestling, somewhat comically and with a great deal of frustrated sighing, with the final, frustratingly complicated, poorly illustrated screw of a brand-new, eco-friendly, sustainable wood crib. With a sigh of weary exasperation, she finally straightened up, her lower back aching a dull, persistent protest, and walked slowly, gratefully to the window. She looked out at the familiar, yet somehow entirely different Ethelberg city skyline. It was still there, of course, a formidable, iconic silhouette against the brilliant, cloudless azure sky, but her perspective, her relationship with it, had irrevocably, fundamentally shifted. It was no longer a glittering, tantalizing symbol of a dazzling but ultimately hollow and deceptive dream, nor was it an oppressive, ever-present monument to Julian's wealth, power, and ultimate dominance. It was simply a city, a vibrant, complex, challenging, beautiful city, a backdrop to her new, unwritten, unfolding beginning, the place where she, Elara Vance, would raise her child, where she would once again create her art, where she would forge her own unique, independent path, on her own two capable feet, by her own hard-won rules. A soft, almost shy smile touched her lips as she instinctively, lovingly, cradled her burgeoning belly. The baby, as if in response, gave a gentle, reassuring, happy little kick. The future was an unwritten page, yes, filled with undeniable uncertainties, with potential challenges, but also, she now realized, with a surge of profound, unexpected joy, with an absolutely exhilarating, boundless sense of pure possibility. And it was hers, all hers. Later that evening, after a simple, nourishing supper of homemade soup and crusty bread, eaten in companionable, peaceful silence in her cozy, lamp-lit living room, she retrieved the small, intricately carved wooden box from its hiding place. She opened it slowly, her gaze falling on the familiar gleam of the silver locket, the folded, cryptic note, the fragile, precious, pressed forget-me-not. For a long, contemplative moment, she simply held them in the palm of her hand, these tangible, poignant links to a turbulent, painful past, a past filled with both incandescent, unforgettable joy and devastating, soul-crushing heartbreak. Then, with a quiet, almost inaudible sigh that held far more acceptance than sadness, far more hope than regret, she carefully, reverently placed them back inside the box. She closed the lid with a soft, decisive click, a look of serene, quiet, unshakable determination settling on her beautiful, tired, but undeniably strong face. She might not have all the answers about Julian's dark, dangerous secrets, about the ominous shadows that still undoubtedly clung to his tarnished name, or even about what the distant future might ultimately hold for him or for them. But in the searing, purifying crucible of betrayal and profound loss, Elara Vance had discovered something far more valuable, far more enduring. Her own indomitable, resilient inner strength, her own unshakable, unwavering capacity for love, and her own profound, limitless hope for the future. She was ready. So ready. Ready for her new beginning. Ready for the bright, beckoning promise of tomorrow. Ready, above all else, for her baby. Dear friend, sometimes life doesn't crack open. It shatters, and all we can do is choose what pieces are worth picking up. Elara's story reminds us that strength is not the absence of pain, but the decision to rise in spite of it. As the Stoics taught, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Yet Elara endured the unthinkable, not by imagining less, but by choosing more. More courage, more clarity, more self-respect. When faced with betrayal, she didn't crumble, she claimed her truth. And in doing so, she carved out something rare and luminous. Her freedom. Her ending wasn't the absence of Julian, it was the rediscovery of herself. That, dear friend, is the beginning of everything. You are not defined by what breaks you, but by how you rebuild. If this story moved you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that heal, empower, and inspire.